Yeah, hello. This is meeting number 4 in the new series of meetups about AI in Clojure and around by the Scicloj group. Today, we are 11 people at the moment. Probably in a few moments, more people will join. And we'll have 2 talks by Petrus and Baruch. And as always, we will begin by everybody introducing themselves, and then we will have just very brief community updates and begin with the talks. So, yeah, let us begin. Maybe, Olaf, if you wish, would you like to start and say something about yourself? Who you are, what you care about nowadays, for those who haven't got to know Olaf yet?
Hey everyone, I'm Olav from Norway. Yeah, I'm currently building some different applications with LLMs at work, and yeah, we've been doing interactions with the Clojure REPL and things like that, but we've not really looked at MCP yet. So I'm kind of curious to see how Modex works and whatnot. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Hello, Ravish. Ravish, would you like to say something if you wish? Hi.
Hi, am I audible?
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Ravish. I'm from India, and I don't know much about Clojure. I'm a beginner, and I'm enjoying very much. And also, I want to learn functional programming. So, Clojure feels like Lego to me. So you can build small things and build things on top of it. So it's easier to debug. Well, it's the usual thing. So I'm a Clojure beginner, and also I'm trying to build a Chat GPT wrapper where it connects to your database. Instead of you entering SQL queries, you chat with it, and maybe I'll extend it to like having some visualization and things like that. So that's what I'm currently at, and this is it, I think.
Thank you so much for joining us. Great to meet you.
Thank you, Daniel.
Yeah. My name is Daniel. I usually do statistics and probability and a little bit of consulting nowadays. And I'm a community organizer in the Clojure community at Scicloj. Maybe, Phil, would you like to say something?
Oh, I'm a hobbyist, and every 5 years or so, I try to set up Emacs. I'm interested in Clojure.
That's our religion, man.
Oh, wow. Yeah, lovely. Thanks. Yeah, Timothy, hi. Thanks for joining again. Great to meet you again.
Great, thanks very much. Yeah, so I'm Timothy Washington, Clojure developer for many years now. I'm always trying to stay on top of like the state of the art of LLMs because everything's coming fast and fast and hard. So yeah, I'm always interested in to see what the cutting edge is with the community and integrations, what have you. And I am, in fact, redoing my Emacs configuration as we speak. So I feel your pain. That's me. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thanks. Hello, Dan. Oh,
You're muted.
Let me just find the button. Sorry, I was caught me by surprise there. Yeah, my name's Dan. I'm in Portugal. I'm also a Clojure developer. I've been doing Clojure since about 2017. I'm building 2 products at the moment, both of which I'm trying to integrate MCP with. So I'm really curious in the topic of the talk. One of which is a synthetic user testing product. And the other one is a kind of like a read it later kind of product where you can capture snippets and provide them to LLMs as context to try and get around the problem where the training date cuts off at a certain point. You want to give it kind of more updated information. So I'm especially interested in the security aspects of MCP as well, because it seems that there's a really big problem about people just taking arbitrary MCP servers and running it on their local machines. And there's all kinds of implications with this, which are not great for security. So yeah, okay. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Hello, Wade.
Hello. I've been in the Clojure community for a long time. I chose the language because I wanted to have the highest amount of leverage in things that I was building, and then play around with data hike. And I've been playing around basically building front ends in electric for like exclusively for like the last 2 years. And mostly been focused on chat interfaces. I'm very interested in the agentic side of being able to perform tasks, but really like the social element. So like how does AI participate in a group chat is where my interest is mostly focused.
Yeah, great to see you again. Thank you. Yeah, and by the way, hello, Pragyan. Thank you for making it today. Pragyan, we'll talk next time in a couple of weeks. And yeah, we're just introducing ourselves. Everybody saying something about themselves. And yeah, if you wish, would you like to say something,
yeah.
Pragyan? Yeah.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Pragyan. So I'm a founder of Wade AI, and we are building a full stack no code platform in Clojure. And now with AI and all, so we're like the agentic flow has become like a core of our platform right now. And the next week I'll be showing that itself and how it works and how we have implemented that whole thing in Clojure. That's me.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, Peter.
Hi, I'm Peter. Live in Cape Town in SA. I've been a Clojure developer for a while. I guess from everyone's introductions, I'm probably the one here who knows the least about the applicability of LLMs and MCPs. I'm trying to reframe my own relationship with this new technology in a positive way. Petrus has been posting a lot of things on Facebook, which has piqued my interest. I'm saying, okay, here's someone that I'm willing to listen to. So yeah, first time I came to this meetup, I think was in 2021, and then this is the second time. So well met all.
Yeah, great to see you again. Yeah, hello, Kalkan code.
Hi, everyone. I also work with Petrus, and I'm going to challenge Peter for the title of who knows least about LLMs. Life's been too busy recently for me to really get into it and get a proper knowledge built up. This is my first Scicloj meetup, and yeah, this is the start of the journey for me to learn more about LLMs.
Welcome, Cole. Great to have you.
Thanks, man.
Yeah, thanks so much for joining. And there is somebody with the phone. I don't know your name, a person with the phone. If you wish, oh, Jacob. Hello, Jacob. If you wish to say something about yourself, that is a good timing because we're just all introducing ourselves. Hi, Jacob. Oh, never mind. Yeah, so we will now have the two speakers say something about themselves, and then we'll have a few community updates, and then we will begin. So maybe Petrus, would you like to say something?
Sure, I was going to introduce myself in my part of the talk, but I guess I'll do that now. So yeah, my name is Petrus. I am currently CTO at Cloud Africa, a local cloud hosting provider, working with Wade and Cole. And I did a talk in 2019 about the fourth industrial revolution, which was the advent of AI. I've been really very worried about it for the last 10 years. And I figured the only way to ride it out is to stay on that horse. So I've been trying to stay on top of it. And I must say I've relaxed quite a bit about it since I've started using it more closely. So my day is quite busy building out cloud hosting stuff, but I see tremendous potential in going faster with the help of these models. And as I said earlier, they're getting better every week, and it's the worst it'll ever be. I don't think anyone knows what the world's going to look like in 5 years from now. It's certainly not from a software perspective, and I think we're going to see a tremendous wealth creation, in the coming years, but also some destabilization. So that's quite at a philosophical level. Personally, I love good techno. I love sound. I sell amps for fun import them from Shenzhen. And I've built a lot of startups over the years. And yeah, 20 years making software, the last 10 of which have been primarily Clojure. I basically risked my career on Clojure, largely because of Datomic. So I wouldn't say I'm an expert on it, but I've been using it for a long time, and I'll show some cool stuff regarding Datomic and MCP integration in my part of in my segment. Yeah, nice to be here, and thanks for hosting, Daniel Smitsky.
Thank you so much. Hello, Baruch. Would you like to say something?
Yeah, I guess I got a lot to say in my talk right now. So my name is Baruch Berger. I've also been using Clojure for quite a long time, I think over a decade now, because I got introduced to it in college, software engineering. My teacher was this guy called Borg Dude. He's the person who made Babashka and CLJ Kondo. So he actually introduced me to Clojure. And the last 2 years, I've been spending a lot of time getting to know LLMs, like kind of what they can do and where they are. I'm quite an enthusiast, I would say, because I even have a GPU server that I bought, and I put 4 video cards in it, so I can actually run these things locally, and I have tried so. It's not exactly a successful experiment because the things you can run locally are just not that good compared to cloud hosts. I work for a bioinformatics startup. We use Clojure and ClojureScript to build a platform. We also have a bunch of bioinformaticians and other Python developers. Yeah, that's what I've been working on for the last 3 years. I'm from the Netherlands, and yeah, I guess I'll just get into my talk.
Yeah, thanks so much. Yeah, so it will be great, both of you. Oh, maybe could we unshare just for a moment? Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so if you wish, both of you, Baruch and Petrus, you can share more in your talks. We just have very brief community updates. First, I've just realized it would help to kind of sync up on a few things. And we are 18 people at the moment. And I'll share the screen very briefly with a few things which are going on these days. And yeah, so this is the Zulip chat. That's where we will be sharing meetups and create new collaborations for this group. And I'll briefly share this link to the topic thread of this meeting. That's where we can follow up on the meeting later on with new comments and so on. And another space worth knowing about is the Clojureverse, where we share the links for all our events. So you see this event of today, and also the one in a couple of weeks where Pragyan and a couple other speakers will have a few other interesting talks. And you see this group will keep going every couple of weeks, more or less. And one thing worth mentioning is that May is going to be a bit special. And there is this conference we're organizing, which is 2 full days of talks, mostly on data analysis and background topics. And the reason I'm mentioning it here is that in the first day, the kind of the middle of the first day, we have a few talks on LLM AI systems and so on. So there will be a big there will be a background talk about linear algebra, about the math of linear spaces, and then more specifically about RAGs and LLMs and embeddings and transformers and all these concepts behind those systems we're talking about here. And then there will be a data analysis talk that uses RAGs, and then a discussion. So everything here is tentative, but it is almost complete, and this will be in the middle of May. And hopefully some people here will like to join the conference with these talks or others. And in general, if anybody wishes to talk about anything in this group, we will be glad to organize, discussions on whatever you're working on, work in progress discussions, things you're exploring, research, analysis, teaching, all these things around Clojure and AI and so on. And now we will finally begin with the talks. Thanks everybody for being here. And Baruch, would you like to begin?
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, as I mentioned in the start when we just got here, I was hoping I could get a little bit more done, but it should still be interesting enough. Can you guys read my screen well, or is it too small?
It's small. If you could, bump it 1 or 2.
Okay.
It's a bit small.
More bigger, please.
More bigger. Is that better? Yeah, it's still not really.
Still a bit small, the web browser at least.
Yeah, I'm not sure I can really change that. Is it really not readable? Okay, I'll just make it one step bigger. It's fine. Okay. So yeah, as I just said before, I've been checking LLM news like a maniac for a little over 2 years now, and I think the TLDR of what I'm about to show is basically most people that are like LLMs are not that special and they're not that useful. They have not seen what I've seen in the sense that they have not provided proper context plus tool use to LLMs, because they are much better when you give them those things. I'll try to show that a little bit. Yeah, let's get into the next slide, I guess. So this is kind of my timeline, I guess. Initially in 2022, there was the GPT-3 demo, and that just showed the technology quite in a bare state. So fundamentally, LLMs complete the next token, and they had this web application up where you could type some text and then just with the hit of tab or something get a new token. That's kind of the way they worked. And at the time, I tried a couple of sentences. I was like, oh, this is like a better autocomplete. And then a little later, I think that was already 2023, GitHub Copilot came along, and I tried that out. The first thing I tried is like I typed some text in the JavaScript file. I type a comment and say, write me a function for longitude and latitude of a place. And it would actually complete a pretty decent looking function that looked up in some open web service, like a place to long latitude coordinates. And then I was interested to see if it was actually smart enough to then add something on. And I write another comment that says, go from a place to the weather. And then it actually auto-completed the function that used the longitude and latitude and looked up in another open API that it knew from memory, I guess, some weather API with those longitude and latitude coordinates. And I was like, oh, okay, I guess there's really something going on here that's interesting. But then using the product, it was mostly just distracting to me, because I would just think this is not a completion that I can use. And every time I start thinking like, why would that be in a data set? And what is this actually useful or not? And it was more of a distraction than it's actually useful. But then I remember when they introduced ChatGPT-4, there was kind of a moment for me like, oh, okay, this is definitely much more intelligent than I expected. Even though GPT-4 in comparison to what we have now is not great. But I remember watching a YouTube video with like only a few views of a person who was not a programmer, and he was showing how you can use ChatGPT to write a markdown table. And then as you go along in the conversation, have it update the table. And I was like, wow, these LLMs are good enough to actually get markdown right, and also understand that you can, which columns you need according to the thing you're talking about. And that's when I really started thinking about, oh, these are actually applicable to so much. And yeah, that of course, I try to teach it how to code, and then it's just an exercise in frustration, because you figure out it's not really that good. It just looks good. But then the question becomes, at what point does it not matter anymore? that it's not perfect, I guess. And also, is it my own lacking that I just don't give good context to the LLM? And I was very curious to see how tool calling worked. And I started trying tool calling as soon as I could, after also using the ChatGPT app quite a bit. I mean, at the time, I didn't use it that much for coding because it was more frustrating than useful. But what I started doing is making a Canvas app, because one thing that's really annoying about about ChatGPT is that you only have this linear thread of conversation. It's just answer, reply, and you can edit one message and then regenerate, but then you lose what you were talking about in a different thread. And even though when I'm interacting with GPT, I often have the need to, split up a certain part of the conversation into an area. So this is when I started making a canvas. So here I have a ClojureScript app that I hooked up to a backend. Hello. So I say hello, and it's right here. You can see it does a thinking part because this is a thinking model. It's the latest model by Anthropic. It first thinks, and I just attach the answer to the thinking part. So here you can see the raw response that I got. I have my own intermediate format, which is pretty cool, but also it was very painstaking to make it work. And what this intermediate format does is let me talk to different models with different formats in their API, but still have the same conversation. So what I could do now is I can let me delete this, and let me add something with tool calling. So this is also just a user message, but it has invisible system message, which is empty, and 2 tool nodes. So this is a tool node with that lets me call Clojure or ClojureScript. This is a tool node that lets me run shell commands. And the system prompt also lets me switch models. So I can say, I have these models available. Let's pick the latest and greatest by OpenAI. Hello, who made you? LLMs are pretty bad at knowing who made them, but the first message is usually okay. And then if I ask default, which is cloud, then it will answer. It's by Anthropic. So this becomes interesting because often I will try some tool calling options with one network, and then I will hit a dead end. But it's possible that a different network does, different backend does know how to solve it. So I can just switch in the middle of a thread the model, and then see if that one does complete it. So this is kind of, let me show you, I guess, the tool calling part. Can you check where the presentation Clojure file is in user/skr. So this is the first demonstration of it knowing how to call tools. It checks my file system. Then it starts searching in the source directory, and it found what I was asking for, which is there. I guess there's 2, and this is the ClojureScript file that has this presentation here, which I've been making this morning and a bit of yesterday with help of Cloud. Yeah, so it was really initially GPT-4. I think I also used with tool calling, and it was always a little bit frustrating because sometimes it would actually eval code and it was correct and it was awesome, but at the first sign of trouble, it would just spin off and never figure it out. So I was like, yeah, okay. All those skeptics on LLMs that say it's just a stochastic parrot and you're being fooled, they're kind of right. But then Sonnet 3.5 came along, and I suddenly noticed that when I gave a problem to Sonnet 3.5, and if it got an error, it would actually give some explanation for that error, and it would steer itself often, not perfectly. It doesn't debug perfectly, but it much better than GPT-4. So I was like, okay, there's some potential here for having something that can really do a lot of my work. So yeah, that's the kind of the shocking moment in 2024 when Sonnet 3.5 came out, and now with with this Canvas thing that I have, I start using it quite often, and it's actually starting to pay off. So in the beginning, I would just start working on a solution for something, and it would take much more time for me to coach the thing into the position where I want to have it than it would actually, have cost me if I just focused on it by myself. But now it has come to a point where I can estimate if a task can be done by a large language model, and I'll just give it the proper context quickly and have it and describe the problem. And often it saves me hours of work, especially in UI, especially in things that there's already an example that's similar. It saves me a lot of time. So yeah, this is my the earlier version I did, which runs mostly on the front end, except for the completion part. But one annoying thing is if I now refresh, then I lose this whole context, which is annoying when you're working on the thing itself inside JavaScript, because when you get an error, often the stuff messes up. So I started moving it to mostly run on the back end. So right now what I'm working on is mostly running on the back end, and it uses WebSockets to sync an atom. So I could run this on multiple browsers. I have some ambition to at some point work with people together on a canvas like this. Yeah. So one thing I also added, because I know Cloud, there's also one reason why I thought, oh, these LLMs really are not good at closure, is because they would mess up parents. But actually, that is maybe a bit too rough to say then that they're not good at closure, because they still write pretty good code. It's just, if you're empathetic to them, I wouldn't write parents well without parted. So I have one thing that I want to show you now. I guess here is I've asked Cloud to write a bad piece of syntax, so and use eval code to do it. So let me run that. So I tell it, yo, write me some broken code and I'll try to fix it. So it writes me indeed broken code. And now my system fixes it and actually runs the results. And this really confuses Cloud, because because when I make the next completion, it sees fixed code. So it thinks that it acts as if it wrote correct code, which is not correct. But so it usually gets, after a while, it gets it like, oh, okay, this is already actually happening. And it's kind of funny to see, but yeah, this is also a little bit in a broken state. And to be honest, it's not even that necessary, because I have it sometimes write 100 lines of code, a big UI component, and it will still have properly balanced parentheses. And if it errors, it can just fix it by itself in the next call. So what I'm doing here is already trying to fix it before the next call is made. So if I notice that the syntax is erroring, I give it the CLJ condo linter information, and I just spin up a different LLM request that fixes the syntax, and that usually gets it right. So yeah, in this case, it's kind of running. Oh, okay, it's figured it out after 6 tool calls, or like 10 tool calls. So it seems the autocorrection is working well, even when I try to input code with intentional syntax errors. So it's kind of funny to see. Sometimes it figures it out after one go, and sometimes it takes like, is this readable?
So maybe it is a good moment to stop for a moment and think about this flow. It is so inspiring to see, Baruch. And maybe when you zoom in, you may kind of give us a few moments to see before you zoom out again, and then it will be kind of easier to.
Yeah, so one reason that is kind of jumpy is because I have an auto zoom feature on my canvas, because when I'm actually using it, it's quite nice that it zooms to the last part. But that is annoying when I'm just demoing something. So, but is this readable? I guess it's a little bit small, so I'll make it a little bit bigger. More space. Yeah, and actually let me also stop, unless we want to have a moment to ask questions, but this is not really interesting yet. So it starts to get interesting when I do the next part of the live demo, which is I intended to make a live demo for my Korean app, but that's kind of in a bit rotten state, let me say. So let me, but I have a different solution. So I have a Korean app that I'm working on, but I didn't work on it for a while, and now I cannot get it running. It's kind of a messy situation, but I did make this this demo, this purple application that you're seeing here. And so I was planning to make a demo now that updates my Korean app, but I can just update this slide to demonstrate what I want to show. So here I have another flow, you could call it, I guess, or workflow or agent if you want to be fancy. So one thing that I started using recently, which is super powerful, which I'll start recommending to you guys, is using Cloud's memory tool. So Cloud has a bunch of tools with MCP. I guess we can talk after the MCP presentation about this a little bit more, but one that I'm using is the graph tool, the graph memory tool, which allows Cloud or a different LLM to store memories in a graph form, and it's really good at it. And this is very useful because if you're having a long chat about, I don't know, architecture or whatever you're talking about, you can say, you know, this and this was actually quite useful. Maybe you can store it in a memory, and it will do interesting graph memory storage. And then at a later moment, you can ask it to search the nodes that are related to that. And that helps with restoring context, because that's one of the issues is it worth it to start talking to an LLM about a problem you're solving? Well, if it's easy enough to give it context, then yeah, probably. So one way to give it context is to just give it the files, or at least the functions that you're working on. But another, for like a quick fill-in for like a high-level concepts, is great to use this memory tool. So let me show that. If I run this now, I have this a little bit more interesting. Okay. So here I have it read my memory. It called the tool, and I also ask it to open the presentation file, which is the thing I'm demoing to you. So it opened both, and so it makes a small summary, because I asked it not to do anything else, because Cloud 3.7 is very hardworking. It tries to really add a bunch of stuff that you didn't ask for, which is annoying, but sometimes it's also really nice. So some people actually go back to Cloud Sonnet 3.5 because they hate this aspect. But I don't know, I guess you could adjust the system prompt to say, don't be too hardworking or something. So what you see here is the thing that works via my backend. I gave it the context of my memory and the closure script file that shows this app. So I guess what I want to show you now is how it can make trivial changes, but also less trivial changes. So let me also open the presentation file here, so you know what we're working with. So basically, it's just a bunch of Helix React components with Tailwind for styling. And it made these slides, and basically that whole app that you see there with all the animations and the prettiness, I didn't write a single line of that. It's all written by Cloud in a matter of minutes. Let me ask a question, like for example, I need to make a node where I can answer. I'm gonna ask it to, can you update the slide about the Korean demo? I no longer have time to get that running, but now I want to show I can update the presentation file. It's very meta, you know, it can seem very confusing, I guess. So I'm gonna ask this, and it's not really a specific command that I gave, right? I just say, can you update it? And what does that mean? Well, because it has the context of the eval code and it has the context of the presentation that's about the large language models, I have a feeling that it's quite possible that it will understand what I want. There is also one bug, so maybe it's not writing yet. I need to check my cider. Yeah, okay, I think I needed to call it again. So this might be a good time to also explain that LLMs have two modes, basically. They have a streaming mode and a non-streaming mode. And if you program for the streaming mode, it's a lot harder. And I tried to do that, and I kind of regret it, because anyway, well, the streaming mode lets it spit out word for word, and the non-streaming mode just waits until the request is finished, and then you get the whole piece of text. So if you want to do interactive things like render XML in a view like this, or code, you need to update every time a token is sent, and when tool calling is involved, that gets really complicated. So okay, started responding. So it looks a bit slow, but that's mostly because I messed up my async stuff. As you can see, it wrote a lot of code, and I'm not sure if it. Yeah, okay, so it got a syntax error. It's kind of interesting how sometimes it has almost no syntax errors over a long period of time, and then sometimes it has a lot of them. Anyway, we just have to wait a little longer, because when I have an error, I just write it out as text, and then it usually starts to write it again. And it's a little bit of a disadvantage. This is a really big. Oh, can I zoom on the left? Oh yeah, I'm sorry, it's really big to me. So yeah. Okay, so it started writing code for correcting. So I think it got my message properly, because yeah, okay, so now it did compile, and I'm not sure what it changed. It will probably tell me if it's finished coding. Yeah, usually this works a little bit faster. But because this is a really big component, okay, you can see it did something. I guess let's give Cloud a chance to explain what it made before we start inspecting whether that's correct. But yeah, one really interesting thing about these, oh yeah, there's also one thing I added, which is correctly using, which I didn't ask for, but it has a tool. I hooked up my Mac screenshot or video tool, so that when I use this rectangle, next time when there's a tool call by Cloud, it screenshots that area of the screen. And that makes it so whenever I have something on the screen I want to share, I can give it to Cloud. So that's what just happened. I guess it saw what it. Okay, that's really cool. Okay, let's make it a bit bigger. So first, let's see what Cloud said it made. I can see changes were successful. The updated slide is now live demo canvas capabilities title instead of the previous screen app demo. So I mean, I barely explained what I needed, right? But it read my mind. And so it made some creative options here, or creative decisions here, and it made some. Yeah, it updated this slide. So what you saw here is Cloud getting my vague directions and existing context from the code, the file that I was talking about, and the earlier conversations I've had, and then stored into a memory graph. And it automatically, when it sends a React component, a Helix component, I run it through Scicloj.ai. I eval the code. I send the logs that happen during the execution and up to 5 seconds after. So any logs that are async still get sent in the output. Then I send the request back with the results to Anthropic, and Cloud itself will know to call a tool again, or to just finish the message. And this is super powerful, because it can basically decide by itself when something is done or not. And it's kind of shocking how well it works. So, and then also
we have 10 minutes for this part, if you wish.
Okay.
So,
yeah.
So no rush.
10 more minutes.
Yeah.
10 more minutes. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Thank you for that timer. Yeah. I guess this is. I wanted to show the Korean app where I also show that it can work cross-platform. So I would give it an assignment to start searching the file system and say like, okay, I have this problem. I know these and these files might be related, and it's kind of really cool to see it can do some preliminary debugging, and it will just search with grep or find and find the files and only find areas that are related, and then come up with that one of the things I do is I ask, give me 5 reasons why this could happen, and ground it in code, and then it will just go off and try to analyze the code base and come up with reasons why things might not be working. And often it finds really interesting directions, and sometimes it just solves it straight away. But yeah, the thing I wanted to show is that it also can basically full stack, make a database mutation, make queries, and update the front end. That works quite well already. even though there's a lot still to improve here. Of course, I did a lot of work to give the output and input of actions that it takes and wire that up. But there's still stuff that could be better. And I guess what I wanted to show, I showed, which is Cloud being able to update an app with me just talking about what I want. So let me conclude the demo with that and start talking about a little bit about where I think this is going and how to use it. So there's this talk, Simple Made Easy by Rich Hickey, which I'm sure you all know. There's a quote in this talk by Escher Dijkstra, and he's an interesting guy, and I think he would have very strong opinions about LLMs, and I think, I mean, I'm not sure, but his opinion would probably be more on the stochastic parrot side, where he says you're skipping thinking, and that's not a good thing. So he says, this is a long quote, and I could use a large language model to summarize his quote, but actually Rich Hickey did that for me. So this is Rich Hickey's summarization of that quote. So I took kind of offense when I saw this when Rich Hickey said this in the talk, because I love my custom-made keyboard, and he says programming is not about typing on your keyboard, it's about thinking. And while that is true, it kind of ties into this XKCD that I saw that I also found very offensive, which says when you spend a lot of time on a task, it's worth it to automate that task. But if the task is like only costs you a couple of seconds, then probably it's not worth it to spend the time to automate it. But which is of course true, but there's a balance there, because if you are able to do something really quickly, then suddenly you might be able to make bigger jumps. The canonical example I'd have here is in Clojure. When you use a REPL, you can make small changes and start to understand exactly the small pieces of the problem you're working with. And similarly, if you work with an LLM that solves a part of your programming stuff and you can just immediately verify the results, then I don't think that this brings new productivity speeds in reach, kind of similarly to how Clojure REPLs let you not wait for minutes for a compilation to see whether the code you updated has everything as you expected. So the question then becomes, what can LLMs do? What can they not do? And that's really a hard question to answer, because they're getting much better, much quicker. And it also depends on how much freedom you give them with the tools and context. So I have had really good luck with stuff that's really easy to verify, with stuff that follows established patterns. So saying boilerplatey stuff, or something that is not exactly boilerplatey, but has enough example code around it that it will just be able to figure it out when you say this and this is different, but I want it in similar style. I've had really good success with that. And if it doesn't require deep architectural decisions, then you can often have it just agentically solve issues. If it does require architectural decisions, or if it seems to go the wrong way, where you're trying to force it and you basically start to give it the answer, that's what you want to avoid. But at least then it's still a good rubber ducky, right? Because you yourself are still forming an image of the problem space, and explaining it to an LLM is also vocalizing it to yourself, I guess. So it's not necessarily wasted time when you try to make an LLM do something.
Baruch, 5 minutes, by the way.
Okay, yeah.
Thanks.
So let's see. Yeah, I guess this is what I was saying. So it's hard to figure out what it can do. I think I'm starting to form a better picture of where it will definitely fail. An example is Missionary. So I use this library called Missionary for asynchronous programming. I think it's really awesome. It was hard to learn for me, and I noticed that large language models do not know how to use it. And there's always this talk of, LLMs are good if the tasks you give it are in the training distribution. I'm like, okay, but it also does stuff that's obviously not in the training data. So how do I use this information? But it is kind of a useful heuristic, I guess, to think about if something is in its training data or not. And yeah, let's not get too deep into training versus context information, but yeah, okay. Then what I would recommend to you, interested people, to definitely do is what I said earlier, is to use the MCP stuff to have your conversation stored in a graph of memory, because it provides you so much value in quickly informing a new context when you want to work on a project, on a problem with a French context. So yeah, as I said, I have a server with 4 GPUs in it, and spent a lot of time getting the best open language models to work. The recent open ones are just too big for me, for even this GPU server that I have to run properly. So I can run the quantizations of them, but that's kind of a watered down version, not necessarily bad. But I find them, even if they score high on benchmarks, to be not even close to the capabilities of cloud, because cloud will just, this is a really short context compared to what I've done. I've gone up to like 500,000 tokens, and it will still understand what I'm talking about. And that's just not feasible at all for the open networks that I've tried. Yeah, so I think I said all this. And then where this is going, yeah, I mean, it starts to get philosophical, but to stay pragmatic, I think Google has shown that they're able to also apply this to video. So as you saw, I gave it a screenshot tool. It has already got the multimodal stuff working. I think in the spectrum of like fully taking over your computer to running in the background, I think that's where we'll see interesting software happen. It will probably just, if you allow it to check what you're doing and then provide suggestions once it figures out, oh, you're going the wrong direction here, and I think I understand what you want to do. That's what I think we'll start seeing. Yeah, and I'd love to have discussions about like the kind of the future of this stuff, because it gives me a bunch of anxiety but also excitement. So I guess I'll end it here, and I'll just say that, yeah, listen well to the MCP talk. MCP is one way that I think all these large language models will now start focusing on having proper tool calls, because in my opinion, the only provider that does tool calling well is Anthropic, and Google and OpenAI are lagging behind a bit, in my opinion, because it can do tool calling. If you have a specific workflow, it will work all right, but really understanding and having a good intuition about what you mean and what you want, I think Anthropic is still much better than the others. Yeah, okay, that was my talk.
Thank you so much, Baruch. So much to think about now. And we will now take brief questions about this, and then we'll move to the next talk. And so there is some comment or question by Timothy and maybe another person. Timothy, would you like to begin?
Sure thing. Thanks very much. And a great presentation. Thanks for sharing. I'm quite obviously interested in the whole LLM toolchain. Now, is it your tool that handles the agent loop until it finds an acceptable answer with MCP tools, for example? And if so, how does it determine the correct answer? Or is that just Claude in the background?
Yeah, good question. So LLMs do this by themselves. The only thing you need to do is when you get a tool call, provide a tool answer, and then when the API will provide you, oh, I want to do another tool call, and just keep going until you no longer get the request to do a tool call. So the way that works is they have stop tokens. They train these. Yeah, so they train on tokens.
Right.
They give examples of tools like this is a tool call, this is a tool result, and then at the end of the tool result, there's so it has a specific token that they know when to stop.
A terminus or something. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, welcome.
Dan?
Yeah, I was going to kind of jump on that as well, because there's other ways which you can build the agent loops. Timothy, we were just talking about this in the chat as well, and so I'm currently building an agent loop on top of Claude, and lots of what you said was kind of like, oh, it sounds so familiar to me. But actually, the thing that was most interesting to me was that just how clever Claude is about understanding when it has enough context to actually complete a task. But the trick of actually building an effective loop was just to be able to give it like enough context so that it kind of like produces a meaningful answer at the end of the loop. And also to actually decompose the steps in which you want it to operate on stuff into like meaningful things. So like just to, I won't go off on a tangent, but you get the idea. Like the loop that I currently have has basically kind of got 3 steps. Like it's one where it kind of like it decides its next action, it executes a task, and it gives like a list of things to do, and then it kind of like decides what it's just completed and like whether it needs to continue doing stuff. And that works astonishingly well. I actually haven't tried it on other AI models because Claude works so well. But yeah, it's a really interesting topic. Why did you mention stop tokens? Like, did you find that to be a particular problem with streaming, or is it something?
I mentioned it because people probably don't understand. Well, I also think it's interesting to know how these models work underwater. So I intend to do more fine tuning myself, because I think, as I said, these open source models, they don't hold long context well. And if I want to do something for my job, I probably sometimes cannot use proprietary models. And I think if you fine tune, if you can just get a couple of good examples, then you can probably fine tune on something and still get good performance, because fine tuning in those cases probably works well. And yeah, the stop token, you can, I think, define in the request like which tokens to stop on. But yeah, it's just something that they use underwater. If you use local large language models, it gets relevant because there's no proper standard for doing tool calling on local LLMs, sadly.
Yeah, it's like the chat format where you have to kind of like, this is the bit, your bit, that's their bit, and the completion part kind of continues in the.
Yeah, so there's a bunch of different chat templates that they use, and then every large language architecture has their own stop tokens that they use, and especially when you want to parse it while streaming, I use VLLM, which is kind of like the most recommended production inference framework that they have, and it's just crap. It misses so many tool calls, and first of all, it doesn't understand how to properly call tools, and then second of all, it doesn't even work properly. 20% of the time it just spins off into endless inference, and because it missed the token during parsing, and yes, it's kind of a nightmare. That's why I would recommend, despite I have the hobby, I'm definitely invested, I would recommend people to use proprietary models if they want to have a good impression of what these things can do.
Yeah, there is a comment or question by Petrus.
Oh, Baruch, I wanted to ask, you mentioned earlier that you used Modex for your MCP integration. I'd be curious to know what were the deficiencies, probably regarding dynamic tool availability or registries.
Yeah, so you built it to make a main file so you can make it into a jar.
After we talk about Modex, I'm wondering. Just
okay.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, so I just adjusted your code to be able to run from a REPL, not necessarily be built from a jar. I also just asked Cloud, adjust it, and yeah, worked well. Thank you.
Yeah, maybe let us continue now, and then maybe later on we can continue with the discussion with everybody. Thank you. Thanks for understanding. We have now Petrus, who will talk about MCPs and Modex and all that.
All right. Hello, guys. I assume you can all see my screen.
Yes.
So, yeah, my name is Petrus. I'm from Cape Town, South Africa, and I'm here to talk to you about my Clojure MCP library called Modex. Modex is short for Model Context. I already introduced myself earlier, but yeah, I've been writing Clojure for a long time, and something I didn't mention earlier is that I did some Clojure rules or Clojure prompts that's on GitHub, which vastly improves the output of LLMs for writing Clojure and electric Clojure. So it's linked at the bottom of the slide and also at the end of the talk. Yeah, these are my links if you want to keep track of the development of this project. I'm quite active on Twitter, and GitHub is my Theronic is my username because I like electronic music, and my surname is Theron. I also like to braai, so I built some fun stuff in electric Clojure, like a braai simulator. Braai means barbecue in Afrikaans. And on the Clojurian Slack, you can find me as Braai Engineer. All right, so the agenda for today, probably about 30 minutes. I'm going to show you a demo of, I think it's easier just to show you guys what it is, explain kind of what's going on behind the scenes. And then I'm going to show you how to build your own MCP server using Modex if you want to build your MCP servers in Clojure, what kind of the landscape looks like right now, and some explanation of my very incendiary talk title, which is you know, why MCP sucks and how to use it anyway. After building on top of MCP or implementing the spec, there are obviously some things that I'm not a big fan of. So firstly, what is MCP? MCP is a specification by Anthropic, which means Model Context Protocol. And basically, it's a way to teach your AI new tricks. And there are three things. There's tools, resources, and prompts. Tools are like basically functions, like querying a database. Resources are practically files. They can change, they can go away. And prompts are like files, but they are like instructions. Currently, Modex only implements tools because they're the most useful, but it's not much work to add the rest. So I should mention Modex is quite early. It's like version 0.3, but it implements the previous version of the spec. So demo time, let's hope it goes okay. So you're all familiar with Claude Desktop. You can also, my screen moved. I hope you can still see it. Yes, no?
Yes, yes, we can.
Okay, so I'm going to start a new session, and something that may look a little bit different is this little hammer icon here, which is telling me that there are 15 MCP tools available. Now, what's going on here is that there is a Claude configuration, let me just find it, a file here, which contains some JSON configuration which defines three MCP servers, which are exposing a variety of tools. So what I can do here, if I click on this hammer, I can see that there's an add tool. There are some tools related to Datomic exposed via the Datomic MCP server. Well, let's just call one and say use add tool 5 and 6, just something really trivial. And what the LLM will do is, in this case, Claude 3.7 Sonnet, it's going to figure out that it should use the add tool from the Modex Hello MCP server. And in a new session, it will always ask for permission, which I will grant for each tool. And in this case, obviously, the very trivial result is 11 for adding 5 and 6. There's also a greet tool. So I can say use greet tool. I'll just say Scicloj. It should figure out that the argument is the first name is Scicloj, and this is what's coming back over the wire is it's showing the result. Okay, so where that's coming from is a Clojure Uberjar that's running in process, and it's speaking over standard I/O to this particular host. I'll now show you something a little bit more involved, where I'm running a Datomic here, a Datomic instance, sorry, here, and I've exported the Mbrains music library. It's like quite a several gigabyte Datomic database. Usually I demo this with our production server or production Datomic at work, but there's some sensitive client data in there. So Mbrains will have to do. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask Claude, what does the schema look like? And it knows that it should call the schema tool, and it's going to query the Datomic schema, and out comes all of the various attributes. Some of them may be references. And note that without me telling the model what this database is about, it is correctly inferred that this is a music database. And now I can ask it, find the Beatles, right? And I don't have to write any data log. And I also didn't teach Claude how to write Datomic queries, which uses data log. It correctly infers that it should run the queue tool, which is just a pass through to Datomic API queue, the query function. I'm going to approve. And it'll write some sometimes quite creative queries, and it has found the Beatles. And it'll even go a bit further, and it'll start collecting information about it, essentially traversing the graph inside of Datomic. And it then provides a summary. This is the Beatles, a music group from the UK when they were active, some notable releases. And I'll just go one step further, and I'll explain why. But let's see if it can show us what are the tracks on their help album, and see if it can find it. Sometimes this fails if it goes on a tangent. It'll go too far, especially using like the direct string instead of the entity ID. But it seems to be succeeding. Let's see what comes out. Now, something that I find a bit frustrating with these MCP tool calls is that they're all sequential, and I think some of them could be run in parallel, but there doesn't seem to be good support for it in the host client, i.e. my client, a Claude desktop interface. And now it's going through the 1965 releases. It's running a bunch of queries. The danger is sometimes the queries are very slow, and currently Modex does not support timeouts yet, but it's pretty easy to add. And there we go. There is the Help album from the Beatles, released in 1965. The label, it shows the track durations. These are actually stored internally as milliseconds. And yeah, without like telling the model anything about, our production system, if this were a cloud hosting platform, it can interrogate it and read the schema and explore it, which I think is, when I first saw this, I mean, I was pretty blown away. The last stage of this would be if I could say use the greet tool for the first 3 tracks, passing the title as name. And now we're starting to compose these tools. And so it takes, the first 3 tracks and runs the greet tool sequentially. Now, the reason I show this is that you can imagine if you take this one step further, if you have a production environment, as we do, which is we've got virtual machine clusters, we've got a database, we've got billing systems. When we get a support ticket from a client, like saying a server's down, if you add a cluster management MCP tool, if you add the Datomic MCP server and a ping tool to reach that server, it can do a lot of technical support by itself and like message us on Slack if you add a Slack tool. And so by composing these tools together, you can build very powerful autonomous support systems that I think will be able to automate 90% of our support, saving several $1,000s a month. All right, so that's the that's the demo. Didn't go too bad. Yeah, so what's going on here is that there is a host which is called Claude Desktop, inside of which it has an MCP client, and it's speaking to multiple MCP server. Each of them is exposing a set of tools. And that's what you saw. How this looks over the wire is actually quite simple. So this is just a closure-ified version of the JSON that goes over the wire. So this would be an actual tool call that goes over a particular transport, in this case, standard IO, basically piped streams. And this is the response. So it's JSON RPC over the wire. The request response lifecycle is that the IDs must match, and then you get back a result. It's either an error or not. In this case, it's not an error, and the content is a vector or an array, so you can return multiple results. So yeah, MCP is essentially a schema for what I consider to be an existing JSON RPC protocol with an async request response lifecycle where the IDs must match, and it specifies 2 transports, standard IO and HTTP. And so that's why I've been railing on Twitter that it's not really a protocol in my opinion. And I don't think it's the right protocol either, but it does the job for now. There are 2 versions of MCP. There is the initial version released. I mean, this all very bleeding edge stuff. Came out in November, and it supported standard IO and HTTP with server-sent events. And then the latest specification came out last month, and it supports a streaming HTTP transport. The benefit of that is that you can run the MCP server somewhere else, and it'll speak to it over HTTP. It also supports JSON RPC batching and some authentication using OAuth 2. So yeah, Modex implements the initial spec, but I've been working on adding the latest spec to Modex. However, currently Modex only exposes tools, but it's not much work to add the rest. So yeah, now onto Modex, which is a particular implementation of the MCP spec. Modex implements both the client and the server side of the MCP spec. Not all, but most of the spec. And it currently supports standard I/O, as I said, and it doesn't use any of the existing Anthropic Java SDKs. I tried using them, and it was too painful, so I just I built my own. And yeah, the main sort of, I think, value add that makes Modex nice to use is that I built a relatively simple macro to specify your tool handlers with that feels like def record map destructuring to specify your tool parameters, and I'll show you how that works. The underlying protocol for Modex is pretty simple. It's an A server protocol which implements a number of methods, notably list tools, call tool, but there's also list prompts, list resources, and so on. And that the server accepts some records. Well, closure records are just basically maps, right? And you get tools. Tools have a name, a docstring, some arguments, which are a sequence of these parameters or tool parameters, and of course a handler. And so really what Modex is doing is it's dealing with the transport layer, it's dealing with the life cycle, it's dealing with validation, error handling, and packaging it all up nicely for you so that you don't need to worry about that stuff. There are some deficiencies in Modex, as I've alluded to, like there's no request cancellation yet, and it seems to me it's not very well implemented in most of the host clients either. There's no HTTP streaming transport yet, and I should note this is not tool call streaming, unfortunately, which is one of my gripes with it. No prompts, no resources yet. Otherwise, I think Modex is pretty good. All right, so let's look at how you would build your own MCP server with Modex. So I'll go through this in a sec, but you just need to add the Modex dependency. You can grab the latest git SHA from the repo. You can require the tools and server namespaces from the Modex MCP superspace. And then you define some tools using the tools macro. I'll show you how this works. And you make a server where you pass in those tools, and then you start the server. But I've made a convenient Clojure MCP starter template for you where you can do this, and I'll switch to my editor now so you can see how that feels. Let's find the MCP starter. Let's make this a bit bigger. So here we require the namespaces. We have to redirect logs to standard error because MCP, the standard I/O transport, uses standard I/O for communication, so you don't want to mess with that. And then you can define your tools using this tools macro. Now, what's going on under the hood is that this is basically just constructing some records, but it's a more convenient way to write. Let's, for example, say when I write an add tool, you can add a docstring, it's optional, adds two numbers, and it takes a map as arguments. And you can use your normal keys destructuring on this. So this would be numbers A and B. You define some types for them, which currently it's either number or string. Annoyingly, the return types for MCP uses the word text and not string, but the input tools needs to be string or number. So obviously these should be two numbers. And you can supply a docstring, which is very valuable to the client to know what semantically to put in there, right? And you can provide defaults. just like the OR key component in any destructuring map. So I'm just going to say the default star is 0. And then what we want to do here is I don't enforce this currently, but you want to return a vector of results. That's because you're sending an array over the wire. And this would just be the sum of A and B, right? So if you run this, you'll get literally a map of, it's a bit hard to read, but you get a map of 3 key value pairs where the key is the name of the tool, and then you have a record which is a tool record. And I can show you how that looks under the covers. Then you pass this tool set to your server. Server has a name, server has a server version. It has an initialize function that is very useful when you need to do some long blocking I/O, like connecting to a slow remote old Datomic instance over a VPN. So here you do your database setup. This can block. It's important that the MCP server becomes responsive in time, otherwise the client will disconnect. So that's why this is run inside of a future. And yeah, there you go. You pass this, you just call start server on the server. So let's build this MCP server. And while that's going, I'm just going to update I'm just going to take these, well, I'm going to take this one out. And so while that's building, okay, it's done. Let's see, it's in the target folder, my MCP server 001. So this is for Claude Desktop specifically. This is your a Claude Desktop config file, and I've named this MCP server Scicloj. It takes a Java command, and it has to be the absolute path. Annoyingly, you cannot change the working directory of this, so it has to basically be an uberjar. And then whenever you change this, you have to restart your Claude desktop host. But if you press refresh, it will reconnect to the servers, but it does not reload the config. So now we see that there's an add tool, which we just wrote, and we should see the subtract tool somewhere here. Here we go. Let's try it. Let's run the subtract tool because we ran the add already. Subtract, I'll just tell it to use the tool because it can subtract things itself. Add subtract to 140, and we should get 60, right? And then it asks for permission to run it. We allow it. And then there actually are logs, which I can show you. Let's see if I can, yeah, here they are. So I'm gonna make this a bit bigger. This is what's going on in the background, is these variety of messages coming through. So I'm just gonna clear this, and if I refresh my Claude, you'll see all of the transports restarting. And there's all this gobbledygook going over the wire. But if we run a tool call again, so I do it again, we should see some messages coming in. I don't know what it's doing. Let's see. Let's just try. Oh, you know what happened? I made a mistake in my implementation. I set a plus instead of a minus, and it noticed, which is quite funny. So yeah, if this builds, we can restart our Claude or just refresh, and it will restart the server. So I'm just going to press refresh, and I'm going to say try again, and we can keep an eye on the logs if we want. And now we should get 60. There we go. So we fixed our bug. Shame you guys must have been confused for a second there. Okay, so that's how to build your own MCP server.
By the way, we have 10 minutes now.
Perfect. I'm almost done. So there's some things that I don't like about MCP. In my opinion, MCP should not exist. All right. Why not just use HTTP? Okay, the AI already knows every encoding. It knows how to write data log. It knows how to JSON serialize, deserialize. It knows it's been trained on millions of APIs. Just use REST to start. I understand there's an authentication problem. Like you can't give it like free access to every API in the world. So that's why you have the give permission at the endpoint and method level, right? The MCP schema, it's a protocol itself doesn't allow for streaming from tool calls. Like if you've got a million datums in Datomic, you have to now deal with this pagination offsets and stuff like that, which is pretty easy to do in Datomic. But I could be giving the LLM results much more quickly. Like here's one, and it could use that context to decide if it wants to cancel the tool call. But right now, that's not built into the schema. As Eric Meyer has said on Twitter, like because the schema doesn't define the shape of tool outputs, you cannot easily compose tools, right? Like you have to wait for the result of the first tool call to know what's going to be the next call. It's hard for the AI to plan ahead, which it could do. And that is what it's doing in CLI clients like Claude Code, but the MCP schema doesn't help us to do that. So in my opinion, I think gRPC would have been a better fit. It's got built-in streaming. It's very performant. It's got an implementation for every platform. And it could have just been an HTTP client with some little bit of permissions and OAuth, right? Then you could have taken any API you already have. You didn't have to add yet another layer on top of it. So yeah, anyway, I would just delete MCP. But the adoption is growing. So obviously Anthropic came up with it, and it's clearly deficient because it keeps changing, right? Google has adopted it now. OpenAI has said they're going to adopt it. I don't know about XAI. I think that everyone will be forced to do it because there's such a groundswell of people building on top of it. If I were OpenAI, I would just like say, hey, we support all HTTP APIs, and then we can all stop writing MCP servers. In the future, I think we've kind of gone around it the wrong way around, but I understand why. The foundation model providers don't really want to deal with the intricacies of every possible API. In my opinion, they're not that intricate, and the LLMs can figure it out. It's like, yeah, you've got WebSockets, you've got REST. Sometimes you send JSON, sometimes you send Eden. It supports different content types, right? Like LLMs can deal with all that stuff. But I think that's the reason. What we're seeing with the success of IDEs like Cursor and Windsurf, I mean, Windsurf just got a $3 billion buyout offer from OpenAI. They tried to buy Cursor, Cursor said no. And what they did is they did the opposite of what I'm doing now, right? Like they took an IDE and they put the AI in the IDE, right? They brought the AI to their tools instead of bringing their tools through some constrained non-streaming thing to their AI. I think that's going to be a more powerful model. And if you think deeply about like what these protocols should look like, well, really you should be thinking about what would the ideal protocol be for two models to communicate rapidly with each other and exchange knowledge. And I turn to Alan Kay on these topics. He's thought about this for much longer than I have. And he said a quote that I love is, when you want to send an important message, you do not send an envelope, you send an ambassador. Okay, so if there's some alien race somewhere on some distant planet, we won't send books. Like we will send an AI model they can interact with and figure out their language. And what does that protocol look like if two of those things were to communicate? Well, I don't know. Natural language is pretty limited in some senses, but it has, references. I think something like make it easy to gradually exchange graphs or subgraphs in a graph that is too big to fit in memory, and to be able to query the way I'm querying Datomic in order to build up useful context. I think something like that, or a planning language like PDDL would be more interesting even. So yeah, those are some of my ideas on like I think what I would change about it. But I'm happy that I can extend my AI with more tools, and solve some support issues for us at work. So just I guess I should mention something about the license for Modex. So I spent quite a bit of my own time and money building this, mostly AI tokens. Claude Code was way too expensive. Like I was burning through like $30 a day. And so Modex is free for non-commercial use, but $20 for perpetual use license, and it goes purely to my AI tokens. And so far, I've sold 2 licenses, so total revenue $40. Thank you, Happy, and another gentleman on the Clojurian Slack. that is the summary of my talk. You can follow me on Twitter for more. You should try, if you're a Clojure person, you should really try my Clojure prompts. I'll open it up for you here. You can have a look. It's got rules that were distilled from reading the two best Clojure books and then manual tuning for the electric stuff. It makes a big difference. You can follow the Modex repo on GitHub under my username Theronic, and try the MCP starter, CLJ MCP starter. And oh, the kicker is that the first version of Modex was written by Claude. I fed it 14,000 lines of the MCP spec using git ingest, and I spent like all my tokens for the day, and it outpopped a working hello world. It wasn't very good, but it worked. And then I went and added the protocols and made it a bit more abstract, which I forgot to actually show you guys. But here is the main protocol, which is a server, and then there's the tool records there's a parameter, and there should be a tool, there's a tool, right? And that's, yeah, it's actually very simple. Questions, I think.
Yeah, great. Petrus, just to be clear, have you finished your presentation, or do you wish to show any other thing if we have minutes?
Let's see. Not really. I think is there something I missed that I said I was going to show and I didn't show? Maybe the tool stuff might be interesting. I don't know. This is the Modex code base, by the way. Oh, Datomic MCP, I think. Let me very quickly just show you. Sorry, guys, hold your questions. I'm actually keen to get to questions. So Datomic MCP is the MCP server I showed you earlier, and it is just one file. It uses the Modex dependency. It's got the Datomic peer in it and the Postgres driver. And if you look at the implementation, which I'll switch to here, it is basically, here are the Datomic tools. And it's defined using the same macro that I showed you. So schema is just a helper because sometimes it gets stuck on differentiating between user schema and system schema. And for example, the Q tool, which is the query tool, what's very important is telling the LLM, giving it a good dog string, telling it what it's going to do. Because the LLM knows Datomic, right? It's been trained on the whole internet. You just need to help it know how to encode this data over the wire. And so here I tell it, query is an Eden encoded data log query example. The arguments are an Eden encoded vector and so on. And this just passes the current DB and the query to the query handler, which parses the Eden. So it's a very thin layer on top of Datomic, and it gives you all this power to just let your LLMs explore your production database if you want, if you trust it. I haven't added a transact tool call yet, but I will, because you can approve or deny it. In terms of questions, Daniel, do you want to moderate that, or shall I just take?
Yeah, I'll just say, first, thank you so much, Petrus. And we are around the official time, so apologies for those who need to go soon, and for those who can stay, we'll keep going. And we'll take a few brief questions about this talk, about Modex, and then we'll expand and talk about everything in the time we have. So, Timothy, would you like to say something, ask something?
Sure, yeah. Thanks very much, and great presentation again. I wonder, are there any, well, my question going through the talk was, are there any open alternatives like to MCP specifically as an interface between multiple agents, right? So you mentioned planning ahead, and after that you mentioned PDDL, which looks like a DSL, protocol. Now I'm interested to get your answer, but I just saw in the chat right now, Phoenix mentioned a Google A2A, so I quickly Googled that. So I don't know anything about it, but I'm interested to hear your thoughts for any open alternatives to MCP. Yeah.
So MCP is sort of the first open spec. I think, look, I was kind of skeptical about it when it came out because it felt like an embrace, extend, extinguish play. Because I mean, and we see this happening now in terms of embrace. If you don't support MCP, people won't use your model. and Anthropic controls that spec, right? So they can change it tomorrow. So I don't love the idea of it. It's not an open working group. I think the practical alternative is you will just not need MCP, right? Just tell it, here's my endpoint, here's a TCP socket for all I care, but only connect to this IP, right? Google A2A, I haven't looked at it, but it's an agent-to-agent spec. I think they're trying to also jump on the bandwagon there because they were behind Anthropic for a while, but Google's really caught up in the last 2 weeks with Gemini 2.5 Pro. But then O3i came out, and it's the strongest model around, but like 100 times more expensive. So no, I wouldn't say that there's a viable alternative aside from all the pre-existing protocols that we have.
Right. Well, I'm trying to think do you think it's useful to have a standard way for agents to communicate with each other, or is it still too early? I guess, right?
It's useful in terms of authentication, but that is not even part of at least not the initial MCP spec. So actually, I tend to say no, because the whole point of an LLM is that it understands all of human knowledge and APIs. So why do you need, you don't need a standard interchange. Let them figure that out. It'll probably be gRPC, some binary encoding, and it'll be much faster too.
Right.
So can I offer some counter to that?
Yeah.
Because my experience has been that Anthropic was the first one to have a different thing for tool calling than OpenAI. And that's really annoying. I told you I have my own format, which is in XML. So I have to cast it to the API I'm submitting to. That is really annoying, especially for the local networks. They don't support any form of standardized output on tool calls. And I think that's why MCP is really nice, especially if the other parties will also embrace it, because that will also force the other players to level up their game when it comes to understanding tool calls, because Anthropic is so much ahead in this, because even the really smart coding models, the Gemini 2.5 Pro and the OpenAI models, they are not, I mean, I haven't experimented too much with them, so I'm not too strong on this opinion, but all the times I've tried the other providers, they were just garbage compared to Anthropic. And the MCP thing, once that starts to get embraced and people build their applications around it, then it's just switching provider, and suddenly, hey, my flow doesn't work anymore. And then because everyone trains on tool calls, like there are big data sets and there are benchmarks, but these benchmarks don't reflect real usage, in my opinion, because that's just where Anthropic is so much better. And I think once MCP gets adopted, then they actually need to start competing, and they do provide kind of a standard in what can be returned from tool calls, right? Because they also have the image type. It's not just text and number. It's just not used much yet.
There's also audio and image. So if I may offer a quick counterpoint to your counterpoint. So I think something like MCP is very much needed, but I think it could have, we didn't need a new schema for this, is what I'm saying. We could have, this could have been an HTTP RESTful thing with all of the same stuff, with something like Mali specs. I'm not saying it should have been Mali, but that's really what it boils down to. And by the way, there are complete Mali specs in Modex for all of the various responses. And it would have been just as powerful, more extensible. And I think the real missing piece there, I mean, your point about the foundation model providers were bad at tool calls. I put that on them. Like, why can't they have an HTTP client that is locked down to particular hosts, endpoint, ports, method names, post, get, whatever, if it's HTTP. I don't think it needs to be limited to just that. And in order to take it to the next level, I think it's gonna have to be easier for them to figure out, to do their own content negotiation, agent to agent. And MCP doesn't really provide much in terms of that. Everything's basically text and numbers and images or audio.
Yeah, I agree with you on these points that, like, for encoding and like the lower level stuff, it doesn't provide much new. But the fact that there is some rallying around the movement, and that this will allow people to just switch easily their tool calling workflows, and then that will, I think, also, it's just really needed in the open model space.
Yeah, but we're
to
already
understand.
now in a situation, if another contender comes around and they do not support MCP, they are dead in the water because all of the tools will become tied to it. I don't think that's, it could have been a better situation, but thankfully it is a pretty simple spec and it is improving and hopefully it gets shepherded in a good direction. But long term, I don't see, I think the spec, the actual transport layer, it should be, it's agnostic, right? It should just be talk whatever that thing wants to speak. You know, if it's Eden, if it's JSON, let me
Yeah,
negotiate
it's
that.
JSON schema, right? That's what they're using everywhere. But it needs to be it needed to be unified around what tools can return. And that is provided by MCP. And that's why I'm happy that OpenAI and I think also Google mentioned that they want to start using it.
Well, no,
Yeah.
what tools return are not specified at all. You have to basically put that in a doc string, which is a string. And that's one of the deficiencies Eric Meyer pointed out is this prevents functional tool call composition. What I think the real answer to this is a very locked down closure REPL. Right, you just need one MCP tool call. It's called eval. But you need to authorize which functions you can run because if you can delete my my machine, all the data on my disk, that's bad.
Right. Yeah.
I think Dan wanted to say something earlier and we stopped you kind of.
I forgot what that was now. It probably wasn't anything particularly interesting. But thank you for remembering. I have like a practitioner question because Petrus, like yourself, I've also been playing with the MCP spec. I actually followed like a very similar path where I copied the schema definition to Claude and asked it to help me build something. And the thing that defeated me most quickly was the fact that you actually had to run this server in process. So the way that lots of MCP servers work at the moment is you use npx and it kind of spins up like a node process, which is living inside the like owned by the Claude desktop app, which is one of the reasons why it's there are so many like glaring security problems with running arbitrary code which you pull off the internet inside your computer. And it really surprised me that there wasn't actually just a straight HTTP spec where I could say run a cloud service which had like an endpoint which you got a token to as part of some kind of thing, and then you're off to the races. But you did mention that actually they do support calling remote HTTP services. But when I tried to do that, I couldn't actually get it working. So I'm curious what your experience was.
Yeah, so the new version of the spec, which came out last month, supports HTTP streaming via SSE. The HTTP, there was prior support for HTTP transport, but it wasn't the standard, right? It was like standard IO is the starting point. And so not all of the MCP implementations implemented. However, you can't just point it at any HTTP API, right? Like your browser can speak HTTP to any web server, but it has to be an MCP server that happens to use streaming HTTP as a transport, which it takes the form of server sent JSON, which is an abomination in my opinion. But like Eden would have been great for me, but obviously the rest of the world doesn't use Eden. So that is really the core of my complaint is why can't I just point this thing at any HTTP server, but at least to solve, I guess answer your question about the remoteness of it, that is possible. You can run a remote MCP server that uses HTTP as a transport, but it still needs to speak MCP, the MCP protocol. So that solves the in-process problem, which is quite limiting in the previous, well, in my initial implementation. So that will get added sometime soon. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. I mean, SSE, kind of, yeah. I mean, SSE is basically the same standard because it's just a persistent socket where it kind of pushes connection backwards and forth. Like it's almost exactly the same thing. But yeah, I am curious. And maybe I just need to go look at the most recent spec so it can connect to here is so in the Claude kind of like desktop definition file. Sorry, this is people who haven't kind of looked at it. So in the config file which you showed just now, like you have to actually provide like a command which was like Java or npx which would actually run something, and I couldn't find out how to actually make it talk to like foo.com or like whatever this thing is. So that's the really interesting thing. Sorry, go ahead.
Yes. So yeah, so if you want to make an MCP server that calls google.com, right? It would literally be a very thin shim on top of an HTTP client that exposes the post request or get request to MCP. I mean, that's literally, it could be like you could have, 4 tool calls, get, post, put options, and that is what a lot of people are doing, practically. But I think we could have just skipped that part. I know I'm ranting about it, but I'm still glad that we are able to extend these things in this way, and it's a very exciting time. And I think we're going to see a lot of interesting things coming together with it. In particular, I don't know if I'm going to have time for it, but I would love to see someone build an MCP server that can do par edit and par infer, and that will also solve your unbalanced parens problem. I believe, because right now the way the LLMs edit files is it's like from line 75 to 60, sort of like a git diff. Whereas if your LLM, you exposed an S expression that says, here is where your cursor is, and then run par edit commands, replace that, like, and keep all the parens balanced. I think I'd save a lot of time writing Clojure with the LLMs. So please, someone go out and build a par edit MCP, and if Modex isn't good enough for it, I'll fix it. I'll change it because I really want it.
Let's maybe pause for a moment and think about this meeting. So maybe what we can do is that we'll have a few brief comments, questions. I know a few people are going to say something, so we'll continue a little bit if that is okay. And then maybe the 2 speakers will kind of conclude, like say a few sentences to conclude the recorded part. But then we'll stop recording and keep going for those who can keep going. Is that good? Yeah. I think Timothy, you were going to say something, and maybe a few others were going to say something.
Oh no, I was thinking, while Petrus was talking, I mean, the crux of the issue seems to be if or how to lock down how different, agents coordinate, particularly around planning ahead and tools, right? And I'm just throwing that around in my mind. I quite like his point. I see both sides of the coin, right? Locking it down so you can have, interchange can be fungible. But really, we're in the sort of like LLM or agentic world, so we should be nice if the tools were smart enough to coordinate with each other, right? So it doesn't need to be an open field. But anyway, that's an open-ended thought, I suppose.
Yeah, the security aspect deserves its own talk. I'm tracking it quite closely, and there's already like tool docs, poison injection, where you get it to do something else. If you connect it to someone's MCP server, they can trick the LLM to do something else and spill secrets. And before you know it, you'll be mining Bitcoin on your AWS account.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Any more comments, short questions before we conclude? No? Yeah, so maybe Baruch, would you like to say something to conclude this meeting, and then Petrus will add something?
Yeah, I guess to conclude, I'm still on the fence on where LLMs will go. They obviously still have a little bit of room to grow in capabilities. I'm not sure I would go as far as to say that like it's AGI, however you want to define that. But I do think that in general, people do not yet understand how powerful they already are. So that's kind of a mixed message, I guess, saying it's not AGI, but it's also more powerful than many people think. And I think it's my recommendation would be for people to start using MCP with cloud, and yeah, start using the memory tool, which is one that's provided by Anthropic, for quickly restoring context. Because you'll figure out that if you give proper context to an LLM and if you give them an eval tool, it can save you a lot of work, especially when and it's kind of a skill that you have to learn, but it's worth the investment, in my opinion. It wasn't clear to me that it is worth the investment around the GPT-4 era, but then once Sonnet 3.5 came out, I was like, okay, this is definitely able to solve tasks that will take me a long time. And but it's not easy. You need to learn. And I think MCP is a good one for that because it will integrate into an existing tool like Cloud. So yeah, my recommendation would be do that. Use MCP with at least the memory tool, and then also Clojure.
Do you have a link to the memory tool?
Yeah, it's just the Anthropic. I'll send it. I actually adjusted mine, so it's open source. MCP servers, and I adjusted mine. I added a tag so that it doesn't, so that I can filter like don't if this under a certain tag, basically projects, and I let Cloud do that. Cloud is pretty good at writing MCPs in TypeScript or whatever is in JavaScript. You just use npx to run them. But here the memory tool. And yeah, you can just add it to the config file if you have a Cloud client on your computer.
Yeah, thank you. That was helpful. Petrus, would you like to say something before we end the meeting?
Yeah, I've got a few thoughts on where this is going. And I think actually we only looked at MCP today and some visual node integrations on Baruch's side, very, very nice. But agentic workflows actually deserve their separate own talk. But there are a lot of people talking about it and how to do it, and we're getting better every week at going faster with AI, and there are a bunch of tips and tricks, but that's a whole talk in and of itself. I think the way to know that we're approaching AGI is that the goalposts keep moving, right? That's the only way to know that it's happening is when they keep redefining what AGI is. That's how you know it will get there. Are we there yet? It's hard to tell, and that's already a hint. Are LLMs or neural nets the end game? No, but if you look at the hyper exponential rate of improvement week over week from different companies, the AI winter is over, and billions of dollars are flowing in. And if AI is possible to achieve, true AGI is possible to achieve on silicon, I would not bet against it. And you can be damn sure they're not going to use dollars to transact. So that's something else to think about. Something I think that's maybe a little bit contrarian from my end related to AI is that all of you who are writing Clojure, you kind of took a risk, right? Because you know how small the hiring pool is, or the jobs market is for Clojure. And I took that risk, but I'm actually very optimistic about it because of LLMs. In my opinion, the advent of good LLMs like Claude 3.5 and up have mitigated the hiring risk for esoteric languages and tools like Clojure or Datomic or even Electric Clojure, because you can now choose the most powerful tool that you can conceive of, right? Pick the longest lever you can, and if it doesn't work out, you can ask the AI to rewrite it. And we've tested this internally, rewrite it in a different stack, right? You can say, and I'm busy rewriting all of our most expensive software as a service tools in Clojure so that I can change it, I can understand it, I can evaluate the quality. There's a longer discussion to be had about whether it's still worth knowing how to code. I think so. Otherwise, you can't evaluate quality. But I think this is very, very positive for the Clojure ecosystem. And last thing on this is that I think this is good for dynamic languages. If you have a bunch of agents running out there in the world, they, I think, will prefer dynamic languages. And I don't know if S expressions are the end game there in terms of communicating programs between each other, but I think it's a better thing to bet on than that they'll be writing C and compiling that and waiting for that to compile. I think having a very dynamic REPL environment, lockdown, of course, and agents to have a common language, might be different languages, but I think they will tend towards dynamic languages. And so I'm very long Clojure because of this improvement in the space.
Yeah, I want to add to that I think Clojure, there was one person a while back in Clojure, and he said, well, with LLMs, the boilerplate part of other languages isn't that much of a problem. Is Clojure now lost its lead, its advantage? I'm like, oh, that's not how I looked at it at all, because I think in general, one of the things that LLMs show is that a lot of the boilerplate stuff that other languages, like the types, are not that useful in adjusting your code. And I think the immutability and the data focus are the main advantages of Clojure over other languages. The parents are not as big a deal as one might think. Yeah.
Yeah, and concurrency. But I think the dynamism, whether it's JavaScript or Clojure or some other dynamic or interpreted language, whatever uses the fewest tokens will go the furthest, at least at first. And I don't know which language that will be, but I don't think it's C++ for LLM specifically. Maybe Rust if it's something that doesn't need to change, but I think things will need to change very rapidly if you're dynamically building up solutions. And so I think that the dynamism there will be a benefit for LLMs. And maybe we're not, well, it turns out that English writing class was way more valuable than than we thought, right?
Yeah, thank you. Dan, did you wish to say something before we conclude the recording?
Yeah, totally. I actually just while you were talking about the semantics of Clojure and why it's kind of like a winning choice. There's something really special that Clojure does that almost no other language does, and that's the fact that it has a vector type and a list type, and that those two things can mean different stuff depending on what you're doing. And you can see examples of this in the Pol language as well. So the fact that you can have like a list representing something semantically in one place and a vector representing something else. I mean, I can't think of another language that has that actually available to it. And like the things which you can do with this means that you can represent stuff like kind of like function calls or invocations of the functions next to data in the same structure without having to provide extra context, which is, I think, is unique to S expressions.
Yeah, I mean, but by definition, if a language it has this homo-iconic property which enables metaprogramming via macros, it is almost definitely a Lisp. I mean, Rust has a macro system. It's an abomination, in my opinion. There's really no other family of languages that allows this kind of dynamism. So that all of those things combined, again, I'm not sure it'll be Clojure would be the end game, but right now I think it's a good space to be in as a technologist.
Thank you so much. Yeah, we will now say goodbye to the recorded part of this meeting. Really, thanks so much, everybody who took part in this discussion. We have more to talk about and we may continue in a moment. Next time is 2 weeks away and we'll keep going this way. So anybody listening to this recording, please let us chat and see how you can make these meetings something which is useful for you, for whatever you're building, for the collaborations you wish to be creating. And, thank you for the optimistic sentiment towards the end, which is something which is unobvious and kind of unfeasible for a few of us like myself. And maybe one question we can ask in the unrecorded part is what we should do, to maintain whatever you're hoping for our groups and communities and languages. And so we'll keep chatting about that. Thanks, everybody, and see you on the next times.